The scream that tore through the mountain air that September morning in 1878 was unlike anything Jacob Bear Thornton had heard in his 15 years of trapping and hunting in the Colorado Rockies. And when he crashed through the pine thicket with his rifle raised, the last thing he expected to find was a young woman covered head to toe in mud, frantically digging in the creek bed like her life depended on it. Bear stopped so abruptly that his boots skidded on the loose stones, sending a cascade of pebbles tumbling into the water. The woman spun toward him, and even through the thick layer of brown mud coating her face, he could see the terror in her dark, almond-shaped eyes. She was tiny, barely reaching 5 feet tall, and her clothes were strange, nothing like the calico dresses the women in Silver Ridge wore. The fabric looked expensive once, silk perhaps, but now it hung in tatters, soaked through and plastered to her thin frame. "Easy now," Bear said, lowering his rifle and raising one large hand in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "I'm not going to hurt you." The woman said something in a language he did not understand, her voice high and rapid with panic. She took a step backward, lost her footing on the slippery rocks, and would have fallen if Bear had not lunged forward and caught her arm. The moment his calloused hand wrapped around her delicate wrist, she froze, staring up at him with those enormous eyes. Bear was a big man, 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle built from years of hauling traps, chopping wood, and wrestling with nature itself. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was thick and untrimmed. He knew he looked intimidating, especially to someone as small as this woman, so he gentled his grip and spoke in the softest voice he could manage. "You are safe," he said slowly. "I promise. Nobody is going to hurt you while I am here." She did not respond, but something in his tone must have reached her because she stopped trying to pull away. Bear could feel her trembling, whether from cold or fear he could not tell. Probably both. The mountain air was crisp this time of year, and she was soaking wet. "My name is Jacob," he continued, tapping his chest. "Jacob. But folks call me Bear." He tried a small smile. "What is your name?" She stared at him for a long moment, then spoke a single word that sounded like Ming-Yue. Her pronunciation was clear despite her obvious distress. "Ming-Yue," Bear repeated carefully, and her eyes widened slightly. "All right, Ming-Yue, let us get you someplace warm before you freeze to death." He shrugged off his heavy coat, a thick bearskin that he had tanned himself, and draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her completely, the hem dragging on the ground. She clutched it to her chest with muddy fingers, and Bear thought he saw the tiniest flicker of gratitude cross her face. The walk back to his cabin took 20 minutes, and during that time, Bear kept glancing at the strange woman trudging beside him. Questions burned in his mind. What was a Chinese woman doing alone in these mountains? The nearest Chinese settlement was in Denver, more than 60 miles away, and he knew from his occasional trips to town that most Chinese immigrants worked on the railroads or in the mining camps. But those camps were all east of here, down in the valleys. These high mountain passes were dangerous even for experienced trappers. His cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines and aspens that were just beginning to turn gold. It was a sturdy structure, built from logs he had cut and notched himself, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Smoke curled from the chimney, and Bear felt a rush of relief. He had banked the fire before leaving that morning, and it had kept burning. "Come on," he said, guiding Ming-Yue up the porch steps. She hesitated at the doorway, peering into the dim interior with obvious wariness. Bear did not push her, just held the door open and waited. After a moment, she took a deep breath and stepped inside. The cabin was simple but comfortable. A large fireplace dominated one wall, with Bear's bed in the corner opposite. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and shelves lined with supplies, tools, and his few books covered the remaining walls. Animal pelts hung from the ceiling beams, curing in the warm, dry air. Bear stirred up the fire and added more wood, then turned to find Ming-Yue standing exactly where he had left her, still clutching his coat around her shoulders. She looked lost and utterly exhausted. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Bear said, gesturing at her mud-caked garments. When she did not move, he crossed to his trunk and pulled out one of his shirts and a pair of trousers. They would be enormous on her, but they were dry and warm. He held them out to her. Ming-Yue looked at the clothes, then at Bear, then back at the clothes. Slowly, she reached out and took them, her fingers brushing his for just an instant. Bear felt a strange jolt at the contact, like touching a live wire. "I will wait outside," he said, pointing at the door. "You change. I will not come in until you say." He did not know if she understood all of his words, but she seemed to grasp his intention because she nodded slightly. Bear stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind him. The mountain air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and the distant promise of early snow. Bear leaned against the porch railing and tried to make sense of what had just happened. In all his years in these mountains, he had encountered plenty of strange things, but nothing quite like this. A Chinese woman, alone and terrified, digging in a creek bed as if searching for something precious. Gold, he thought suddenly. She had been panning for gold, but that did not make sense either. Why would she be alone, and why so far from any established mining operation? A soft sound from inside the cabin made him turn. "Ming-Yue? Are you all right?" There was a pause, then her voice, small and uncertain. "All right." Bear opened the door and stepped inside. Ming-Yue stood by the fire, wearing his shirt which hung to her knees like a dress. She had not put on the trousers, and Bear could not blame her. They would have fallen off immediately. Her own clothes lay in a muddy heap on the floor, and she had done her best to wipe the mud from her face and hands, though streaks still remained in her long black hair. "Better?" Bear asked. She nodded, then swayed on her feet. Bear was across the room in 3 long strides, catching her before she could fall. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, and he could feel every delicate bone beneath her skin. When was the last time she had eaten? "Easy," he murmured, carrying her to his bed and setting her down gently. "You are safe now. I have you." Ming-Yue's eyes fluttered closed, and for a moment, Bear thought she had passed out. But then she opened them again and looked up at him with an expression so vulnerable and trusting that it made his chest ache. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words were so clear and unexpected that Bear nearly stumbled backward. "You speak English," he said, stunned. "A little," she admitted, her accent thick but her pronunciation careful. "I learned from missionaries in San Francisco." San Francisco. That was hundreds of miles away. "What are you doing here?" Bear asked gently. "What happened to you?" Her face crumpled and tears began to stream down her cheeks, cutting clean paths through the remaining mud. "Please," she whispered, "please do not send me back. I cannot go back. I would rather die." The raw desperation in her voice made Bear's protective instincts surge. He crouched beside the bed, bringing himself closer to her eye level. "Nobody is sending you anywhere," he said firmly. "You are safe here. I promise you, Ming-Yue, nobody is going to hurt you." She searched his face, looking for signs of deception, and whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she closed her eyes again and let out a shaky breath. Within moments, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a deep sleep. Bear stood and watched her for a long moment, this mysterious woman who had crashed into his solitary life like a bolt of lightning. Then he went to work. He heated water and filled his wash basin, gathered clean cloths, and prepared a simple soup from dried venison and vegetables. While the soup simmered, he gently cleaned the remaining mud from Ming-Yue's face and hands, careful not to wake her. As the dirt came away, he found himself staring at features of startling delicacy and beauty. She looked young, perhaps 20 or 21, with smooth skin and high cheekbones. Her hair, once he'd cleaned it, was thick and lustrous, falling past her shoulders in waves, but it was the bruises that made Bear's jaw clench with anger. Dark purple marks ringed her wrists like shackles, and there were more bruises on her arms, some old and fading, others fresh and livid. Someone had hurt her, badly, repeatedly. Bear felt a rage building in his chest, hot and fierce. He did not know who had done this, but if they came looking for her, they would have to go through him first. The afternoon faded into evening, and still Ming-Yue slept. Bear sat at his table, ostensibly working on repairing a trap, but mostly watching her. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to have another person in his space. It felt strange and right all at once, as if something he had not known was missing had suddenly fallen into place. When darkness fell, Bear lit his lanterns and banked the fire to burn low and steady through the night. He pulled his chair closer to the bed and settled in, his rifle across his knees. He would keep watch. If anyone came looking for Ming-Yue, they would find Bear Thornton waiting. Ming-Yue woke sometime before dawn. Bear saw her eyes open, saw the moment of confusion as she registered her surroundings, followed by the flash of fear. Then her gaze found him in the shadows, and she relaxed slightly. "You are still here," she said softly. "Where else would I be?" Bear replied. "This is my cabin." A tiny smile flickered across her face. "I thought perhaps I'd dream you. The big man who catch me. Keep me warm. Keep me safe." Bear felt something shift in his chest, some long, frozen part of him beginning to thaw. "Not a dream," he said. "I am real." "Yes," she whispered, "real." She sat up slowly, wincing slightly. "Thank you for everything." "You are welcome." Bear stood and crossed to the fireplace where his soup had been simmering all night. "You need to eat. When was your last meal?" Ming-Yue thought for a moment. 3 days, maybe 4. 4 days. No wonder she had collapsed. Bear ladled soup into a bowl and brought it to her along with a chunk of bread. "Eat slowly," he warned. "Your stomach will not be happy if you rush." She took the bowl with both hands, cradling it like something precious. The first spoonful made her close her eyes in apparent bliss. "This is good," she said. "Very good." Bear snorted. "It is just venison soup, nothing fancy." "It is heaven," Ming-Yue insisted, and took another careful sip. While she ate, Bear prepared his own breakfast, thick slices of bacon and more bread toasted over the fire. He could feel Ming-Yue watching him, and when he glanced over, she quickly looked away, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "You can ask," Bear said gently. "Whatever you want to know." Ming-Yue finished her soup and set the bowl aside. "Why do they call you Bear?" He had to smile at that. It was not the question he had been expecting. "Because when I was 17, I killed a grizzly bear with just a knife. It had mauled my partner and I had no choice. The name stuck." Her eyes went wide. "You kill bear with knife?" "I did what I had to do," Bear said with a shrug. "Just like you are doing what you have to do." The mention of her own circumstances made Ming-Yue's face fall. She looked down at her hands, twisting the hem of Bear's shirt between her fingers. "I suppose you want to know my story." "Only if you want to tell it," Bear replied. "I will not force you." Ming-Yue was quiet for a long moment, and Bear did not push. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to speak. "In my country, I am princess, royal family, very old, very important." She laughed bitterly. "But that means nothing here." Bear listened in stunned silence as she unfolded her story. She had been raised in a palace, educated by the finest tutors, prepared for a life of luxury and privilege. But political turmoil and family betrayals had forced her to flee China with her personal guard and a small group of loyal servants. They had made their way to San Francisco, where they had hoped to find safety among the Chinese community there. Instead, they had found corruption and danger. Her guards had been killed, and Ming-Yue had been sold to a cruel man who ran a mining operation in Colorado. He had forced her and dozens of other Chinese workers to pan for gold in brutal conditions, taking everything they found and giving them barely enough food to survive. "He beat us if we do not find enough gold," Ming-Yue said, her voice hollow. "Beat us if we are too slow. Beat us if we look at him wrong. I watch him kill man for dropping gold nugget in water." She looked up at Bear, and her eyes were fierce despite the tears. "I know he will kill me too eventually, so I wait. I plan. And 3 days ago, I run." "You have been running for 3 days?" Bear asked, horrified. "Alone, with no food or supplies?" "I take what I can carry," Ming-Yue said. "Not much, but I know if I stay, I die. Better to die free in mountains than die in chains." She gestured at her wrists where the bruises from manacles still showed clearly. Bear felt that rage building again, hotter than before. "What is his name?" he asked quietly. "The man who did this to you." "Why?" Ming-Yue's voice was sharp with fear. "You will not take me back, you promise." "I'm not taking you anywhere," Bear said. "But if he comes looking for you, I want to know who I'm facing." Ming-Yue studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "His name is Cyrus Blackwood. He has big mining camp near town called Silver Ridge. Many men work for him, bad men, dangerous men." Silver Ridge. That was the nearest town to Bear's cabin, about 15 miles down the mountain. He had been there a few times to trade furs and buy supplies, though he generally avoided towns when he could. Too many people, too much noise. But he knew of Cyrus Blackwood by reputation. The man owned half the mining operations in the territory and was known for his ruthlessness. "He will not find you here," Bear said firmly. "This cabin is well hidden, and I know these mountains better than any man alive. You are safe." "For how long?" Ming-Yue asked. "He will look for me. He does not like losing his property." She spat the last word like a curse. "You are not property," Bear said, his voice hard. "You are a person, a human being, and I will die before I let anyone take you back to that hell." The fierce conviction in his words seemed to surprise Ming-Yue. She blinked at him, then said softly, "Why? Why do you care? You do not know me." It was a fair question, and Bear did not have a good answer, or rather, he had an answer, but it made him uncomfortable. The truth was that from the moment he had seen Ming-Yue in that creek bed, covered in mud and terrified, something in him had awakened, something that had been dormant for years, buried under loneliness and isolation. He cared because looking at her made his heart beat faster. He cared because her smile, rare as it was, lit up his dark cabin like sunshine. He cared because the thought of anyone hurting her made him want to tear the world apart with his bare hands. But he could not say any of that. Not yet. So instead, he said, "Because it is the right thing to do." Ming-Yue looked at him for a long moment, and Bear had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see right through his deflection. But she just nodded and said, "Thank you, Bear, for being right kind of man." The days that followed fell into a pattern. Ming-Yue recovered her strength slowly, helped along by Bear's cooking and the safety of the cabin. She was curious about everything, asking endless questions about his life in the mountains, his trapping, his hunting. Bear found himself talking more than he had in years, telling her stories about his past, his family back east, whom he had not seen in a decade, the reasons he had chosen this solitary life. In turn, Ming-Yue shared more about her own life. She told him about growing up in the Forbidden City, about gardens that stretched for miles and servants who catered to her every whim. She told him about her education, how she had learned to read and write in both Chinese and English, how she had studied poetry and art and music. She told him about her family, her stern father and gentle mother, her older brothers who had vied for power. "I was supposed to marry Prince from another family," Ming-Yue said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Unite two powerful houses, but then everything fall apart, revolution coming. My family lose power, we flee or die." "Do you miss it?" Bear asked. "Your old life?" Ming-Yue considered the question. "I miss my mother, my servants who were kind to me. But rest?" She shook her head. "No, that life was cage. Beautiful cage, but still cage. I have no freedom, no choice. Everything decided for me before I was born." "And now?" Bear asked quietly. "Now I'm free," Ming-Yue said and smiled at him. "Scared and poor and wearing too big clothes, but free." Bear returned her smile, feeling that warmth in his chest expand. She was beautiful when she smiled, her whole face lighting up. He found himself looking for ways to make her laugh, telling jokes and doing silly things just to see that expression. It was during the second week that Bear realized he needed to make a trip to Silver Ridge. His supplies were running low, and with an extra mouth to feed, he would need more food. He did not want to leave Ming-Yue alone, but he also did not dare take her to town. If Blackwood's men were looking for her, they would certainly be watching Silver Ridge. "I will be gone overnight," Bear told her. "Maybe 2 nights, depending on the weather. Will you be all right here alone?" Ming-Yue straightened her spine, and Bear saw a flash of the princess she had once been. "I am not helpless," she said with dignity. "I can care for myself." Bear held up his hands. "I did not say you were helpless. I'm just worried." Her expression softened. "I know, and I appreciate. But I survived 3 days in wilderness alone. I can survive 2 days in warm cabin." She had a point. Bear showed her where he kept his weapons, including a rifle and 2 pistols. He taught her how to load and fire them, and was impressed by how quickly she learned. He showed her how to bar the door, how to keep the fire going, where the emergency supplies were hidden. "If anyone comes," Bear said seriously, "you hide. There is a cellar under the cabin, access through that trap door." He pointed to a barely visible seam in the floorboards. "You get down there, pull the door shut over your head, and you do not come out until you hear my voice. Understood?" "Understood," Ming-Yue said. Then, to Bear's surprise, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and warm in his much larger grip. "Be careful. Come back safe." "I will," Bear promised, and meant it. He had something worth coming back to now. The trip to Silver Ridge took Bear most of the day. He pushed hard, wanting to get his business done and return to the cabin as quickly as possible. The town was busy when he arrived, full of miners and prospectors enjoying their weekly break from the diggings. Bear kept his head down and made his way to the general store. He was loading his supplies onto his pack mule when he heard a conversation that made his blood run cold. "Blackwood is offering $100 for information about that Chinese girl," one man was saying. "Says she stole from him and ran off." $100, another man whistled. "That's a lot of money. What did she steal?" "Gold, I heard. A whole pouch of nuggets. Blackwood is furious." Bear kept his face neutral, but inside he was seething. Ming-Yue had not said anything about stealing gold, but even if she had, Bear would not blame her. She had been forced to pan for it, beaten and starved. She had earned whatever she had taken. "You think someone will find her?" the first man asked. "Out in these mountains? Probably dead already. Bears, mountain lions, cold. She would not last long." Good, Bear thought. Let them think she is dead. That would make everything easier. He finished loading his supplies and led his mule toward the edge of town. But as he passed the saloon, the doors swung open and 3 men stumbled out, clearly drunk. One of them bumped into Bear and looked up with bleary eyes. "Watch where you're going," the man slurred. Then his eyes focused, and something like recognition flickered across his face. "Hey, I know you. You are that mountain man, the one they call Bear." "That is right," Bear said evenly, "and I am leaving. So if you will excuse me." But the man grabbed his arm. "Wait, you live up in the high country, do you not? You seen any Chinese women up there?" Bear looked at the hand on his arm, then at the man's face. "No," he said flatly. "I have not seen anyone. Now let go." The man's grip tightened. "Blackwood is looking for a runaway. Says she is small, pretty, speaks a little English. You sure you have not seen her?" "I am sure," Bear said, and there was enough menace in his voice that the man finally let go and stepped back. "Like your friend said, she's probably dead by now. Mountains are not kind to city folk." He turned and walked away before the men could ask any more questions, but he could feel their eyes on his back. That was not good. If they started to suspect he was hiding Ming-Yue, they might come looking. He needed to get back to the cabin, and he needed to come up with a plan. Bear pushed through the night, not stopping to rest. By the time dawn broke, he was halfway home, and by mid-morning he was approaching the cabin. Everything looked quiet and peaceful, exactly as he had left it. But Bear did not relax until he opened the door and found Ming-Yue safe inside, working on something by the fire. She looked up when he entered, and her face broke into a brilliant smile. "You come back," she said, as if there had been any doubt. "Of course I came back," Bear said, setting down his packs. "I promised, did I not?" Ming-Yue crossed the room and, to Bear's surprise, wrapped her arms around him in a quick hug. She barely reached his chest, and Bear had to resist the urge to pick her up and hold her properly. Instead, he gently patted her back, intensely aware of how small and fragile she felt. "I miss you," Ming-Yue said, pulling back and looking up at him. "Cabin very quiet without you." "I missed you too," Bear admitted, and realized it was true. 2 days away, and he had thought about her constantly, worried about her, hurried back to her. When had she become so important to him? But the warm moment could not last. Bear needed to tell Ming-Yue what he had heard in town. He led her to the table and sat her down, then explained about the reward and the men's questions. Ming-Yue listened, her face growing pale. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I bring danger to you. Perhaps I should leave." "You are not going anywhere," Bear said firmly. "This is not your fault, but we need to be careful. I think some of those men were suspicious." "What do we do?" Ming-Yue asked. Bear had been thinking about that all night. "We stay alert, we keep watch, and if they come, we are ready to defend ourselves, or to run if we have to." "I do not want to run anymore," Ming-Yue said softly. "I am tired of running." Bear reached across the table and took her hand, engulfing her small fingers in his large calloused ones. "Then we will stand and fight," he said. together. Ming-Yue looked down at their joined hands, then back up at Bear's face. Something passed between them in that moment, some understanding or recognition. Bear saw her pupils dilate, saw the way her breath caught. "Bear," she whispered, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "The gold," Ming-Yue said. "They are right. I did take some before I run. Not much, just a few nuggets I hide. But I do not steal from Blackwood. I steal from myself. That gold, I find it. My hands in freezing water, my back breaking from bend over, my gold." "Of course it is," Bear said. "You earned every speck of it." "I hide it," Ming-Yue continued, "in creek where you find me. I think maybe if I can get enough, I can buy ticket far away, start new life. But then I lose it when I fall in water, all gone." She laughed bitterly. "Stupid, so stupid." "Not stupid," Bear said firmly. "You were trying to save yourself. That is brave, not stupid." "Brave princess who lose everything," Ming-Yue said. "Brave woman who survived," Bear corrected. "And you have not lost everything. You have your life, your freedom, and you have me." The last words hung in the air between them. Ming-Yue stared at him, her eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. "I have you," she repeated softly. Bear knew this was a moment of truth. He could deflect, make a joke, pretend he had meant it in a purely friendly way. Or he could be honest, take a risk, tell her what had been building in his heart for the past 2 weeks. "Yes," he said simply, "for as long as you want me." A tear escaped and rolled down Ming-Yue's cheek. "What if I want you forever?" Bear's heart stuttered in his chest. He stood slowly, still holding her hand, and Ming-Yue rose with him. They stood facing each other, the table between them feeling like a vast distance. Bear stepped around it, closing the gap, and Ming-Yue tilted her head back to look up at him. "I am not a prince," Bear said quietly. "I am just a mountain man. I live in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. I have no money, no title, nothing to offer you." "You offer me safety," Ming-Yue said, reaching up to touch his bearded face. "You offer me kindness, respect. You offer me freedom to choose my own life. That is more than any prince ever offer." Bear covered her hand with his own, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. "I think I started falling the moment I saw you in that creek bed, covered in mud and still fighting." "I already fall," Ming-Yue whispered. "I fall when you give me your coat, when you carry me here, when you stay awake all night to watch over me, when you treat me like person, not property, not princess, just Ming-Yue." Bear lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Ming-Yue rose up on her toes, closing the distance between them, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. She tasted like honey and hope, and Bear felt something settle into place deep in his soul. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Bear rested his forehead against Ming-Yue's, his arms wrapped around her, holding her close. "I will protect you," he murmured. "Whatever happens, whatever comes, I will keep you safe." "I know," Ming-Yue said, "and I will stand with you. We face everything together." For the next few days, Bear and Ming-Yue existed in a bubble of happiness. They worked together, cooked together, talked for hours by the fire. Bear taught Ming-Yue how to track animals, how to read the signs of the forest. Ming-Yue taught Bear words in Chinese, told him about her culture, her traditions. They kissed often, stolen moments that grew in passion and heat, though Bear was always careful to be respectful, to let Ming-Yue set the pace. At night, Bear still slept on the floor by the fire, giving Ming-Yue his bed. But one night, about 3 weeks after he had found her, Ming-Yue climbed down from the bed and curled up next to him on the bearskin rug. "I am cold," she said simply. "Hold me." Bear wrapped his arms around her, and they fell asleep tangled together, her head on his chest, his hand in her hair. It felt right in a way that nothing else ever had. But their peaceful idyll could not last forever. On a gray afternoon in early October, Bear was outside chopping wood when he heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. His blood turned to ice. Bear grabbed his axe and strode toward the cabin. He burst through the door to find Ming-Yue already moving, heading for the cellar. Their eyes met, and in that instant 1,000 things were said without words. "Go," Bear said. "Now." Ming-Yue pulled up the trapdoor and dropped into the cellar. Bear replaced the door and kicked a rug over it, then grabbed his rifle. He was standing on the porch, weapon in hand, when 6 riders emerged from the trees. The man in front was tall and thin, with a sharp face and cold eyes. He wore expensive clothes that seemed out of place in the wilderness, and there was a cruel twist to his mouth. Bear knew without being told that this was Cyrus Blackwood. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Bear asked, his voice deceptively calm. Blackwood reined in his horse and looked down at Bear with obvious disdain. "I am looking for a Chinese woman. Small, pretty, speaks English. I was told you might know something about her." "I am afraid you were told wrong," Bear said. "I live alone up here, have not seen any Chinese women or anyone else." "Is that so?" Blackwood's smile was not friendly. "Then you will not mind if we search your cabin?" "Actually, I would mind," Bear said, raising his rifle slightly. "This is private property, and you are not welcome here." One of Blackwood's men, a burly fellow with a scarred face, laughed. "Big Man thinks he can take all 6 of us." "Big Man knows these mountains better than you ever will," Bear replied. "And Big Man is a damn good shot. First one of you to step foot on my porch is getting a bullet through the brain." Blackwood held up a hand, stopping his men from advancing. "Let us be reasonable," he said. "The woman is my property. She ran away, stole from me. I just want what is mine." "People are not property," Bear said, his voice hard as stone. "The war settled that question?" "The war did not say anything about Chinese," Blackwood sneered. "She owes me for her passage, for her food, for her lodging. She is mine until that debt is paid." "Sounds like slavery to me," Bear observed, "which is illegal. So even if I had seen this woman, which I have not, I would not turn her over to you." Blackwood's face flushed with anger. "You are making a mistake. I am a powerful man in this territory. I can make your life very difficult." "Go ahead and try," Bear said, "but do it from somewhere else. You are on my land, and I am telling you to leave, now." For a long moment, the 2 men stared at each other, and Bear could feel the tension crackling in the air. His finger was on the trigger, and he knew he could drop Blackwood before the other men could react. But that would start a firefight, and he might not survive 6 against 1. Finally, Blackwood jerked his reins, turning his horse. "This is not over," he said. "I will find her. And when I do, I will make sure you pay for harboring her." "Looking forward to it," Bear said coldly. The riders wheeled and galloped back the way they had come. Bear stood on the porch until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did he lower his rifle and go back inside. "Ming-Yue," he called. "They are gone. You can come out." The trapdoor lifted and Ming-Yue climbed out of the cellar. Her face was pale and streaked with tears. "I hear everything," she said. "You risk your life for me." "And I would do it again," Bear said, pulling her into his arms. In a heartbeat, Ming-Yue clung to him, her small body shaking. "He will come back, with more men. He will not stop until he find me or kill you." "Probably," Bear agreed. "So we need a plan." They spent the rest of the day discussing options. They could run deeper into the mountains, try to stay ahead of Blackwood's men. But winter was coming, and survival in the high country would be brutal. They could try to make it to Denver, where Ming-Yue might find help from the Chinese community. But that was a long journey, and Blackwood had men everywhere, or they could stand and fight. "I am tired of running," Ming-Yue said again. "And this place, this cabin, it is first real home I have since leaving China. I do not want to leave." "Then we stay," Bear said, "but we need help. Blackwood has too many men for me to handle alone." "Where do we find help?" Ming-Yue asked. Bear thought for a moment. "I know some people in Silver Ridge. Not friends exactly, but folks who do not like Blackwood. He has been squeezing the smaller mining operations, driving people out of business. Some of them might be willing to stand against him." "It is dangerous to go back to town," Ming-Yue said. "Everything is dangerous now," Bear replied, "but I will not let Blackwood take you, whatever it costs." The next morning, Bear rode down to Silver Ridge alone. He did not like leaving Ming-Yue, but she was well hidden and well armed, and this was a risk he had to take. In town, he sought out a man named Ezra Cooper, who ran a small mining operation north of town. Bear had traded with Ezra before and knew him to be an honest man. Ezra listened to Bear's story with a grim expression. "I believe you," he said when Bear finished. "Blackwood is a snake. He tried to buy my claim last year, and when I would not sell, he had his men sabotage my equipment. Cost me a fortune to repair. Will you help me? Bear asked bluntly. Ezra stroked his gray beard. What you are asking could start a war. Blackwood has a lot of men and a lot of money. I know, Bear said, and I'm not asking you to fight my battle. But if you could just spread the word, let folks know what is really happening, maybe get a few men to stand with me when the time comes. I will do better than that, Ezra said. I will stand with you myself, and I know at least a dozen others who will too. We are all tired of Blackwood pushing us around. Bear felt a surge of hope. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Ezra said. This could get ugly. Over the next week, Ezra quietly gathered support. Men who had been wronged by Blackwood, men who believed in justice, men who were just tired of bullies. They began meeting at Ezra's claim, planning their strategy. Bear attended as many meetings as he could, though he hated leaving Ming-Yue alone. And through it all, Bear and Ming-Yue grew closer. Their relationship deepened from affection to profound love. Ming-Yue became more confident, more comfortable in her new life. She learned to shoot with deadly accuracy, learned to move through the forest as quietly as a deer. She was adapting, transforming from the frightened woman Bear had found into someone strong and capable. One evening, about 6 weeks after their first meeting, Ming-Yue and Bear were sitting by the fire when she suddenly said, "In my culture, woman does not choose husband. Father choose, family choose, woman has no say." Bear looked at her, his heart beginning to pound. "And how do you feel about that?" "I feel very grateful I am no longer bound by that culture," Ming-Yue said, meeting his gaze. "I feel grateful I can choose for myself, and I choose you, Bear. If you will have me." Bear was across the room in an instant, dropping to one knee in front of her. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" "I'm asking you to marry me," Ming-Yue said, and there was no hesitation in her voice. "I'm asking you to be my husband, to stand with me, to build life with me." "Yes," Bear said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and when they broke apart, both were laughing and crying at the same time. "I do not have a ring," Bear said. "I do not have anything fine enough for a princess." "I am not princess anymore," Ming-Yue said firmly. "I am just woman who love mountain man, and that is all I want to be." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at Ezra's claim, attended by the group of men who had pledged to stand against Blackwood. There was no preacher, so Ezra, who had once studied for the ministry, performed the ceremony. Ming-Yue wore a simple dress borrowed from Ezra's wife, and Bear wore his cleanest shirt and trousers. They exchanged vows under the open sky, promising to love and protect each other for all their days. When Ezra pronounced them husband and wife, Bear lifted Ming-Yue off her feet and kissed her, to the cheers of their small audience. It was the happiest moment of Bear's life. But happiness had to be stolen in snatches because the threat of Blackwood still loomed. And then, on a cold November morning, the threat became reality. Bear was checking his trapline when he heard the gunshot. It echoed through the mountains, coming from the direction of the cabin. Bear's blood turned to ice. He dropped everything and ran, his long legs eating up the distance in great strides. He burst into the clearing to find smoke rising from the cabin's chimney and Ming-Yue standing on the porch, rifle in hand. At her feet lay a man, clutching his leg and groaning in pain. "Ming-Yue!" Bear gasped, skidding to a halt. "What happened?" "He tried to break in," Ming-Yue said calmly, though her hands were shaking. "So I shoot him, just in leg. I'm not monster like Blackwood." Bear looked at the man on the ground and recognized him as one of Blackwood's hired thugs. "Where are the others?" he demanded. "You would not come alone." The man just groaned, and Bear grabbed him by the collar. "Talk, or I let my wife shoot your other leg." "Wife?" The man's eyes widened. "You married the Chinese girl?" "I married my wife," Bear corrected. "Now answer the question. Where are your friends?" "Went back to get Blackwood," the man gasped. "Soon as they saw smoke from the cabin, they know she is here now. They will come back with everyone." Bear cursed. They had maybe an hour, 2 at most. He looked at Ming-Yue. "Get your things. We need to leave." "No," Ming-Yue said firmly. "We stay. We fight." "Ming-Yue, there will be too many of them." "Then we get help," Ming-Yue said. "You have friends now. Use them." She was right. Bear tied up the injured man and dragged him into the cabin, then saddled his horse. "I'm going to get Ezra and the others," he told Ming-Yue. "Bar the door behind me. Do not let anyone in unless you hear my voice." "Be careful," Ming-Yue said, kissing him quickly. "I just marry you. I'm not ready to be widow." "You will not be," Bear promised. "I'm coming back, and we are ending this today." He rode hard for Ezra's claim and found the older man just sitting down to lunch. Bear quickly explained the situation, and within minutes, Ezra was rallying his men. 15 miners, all armed and grim-faced, mounted up and followed Bear back toward his cabin. They arrived to find Blackwood and at least 20 men already surrounding the cabin. Shots were being fired, and Bear could see chips of wood flying from the cabin walls where bullets struck. His heart nearly stopped. Ming-Yue was in there, alone and under attack. "Blackwood!" Bear roared, his voice echoing through the clearing. The shooting stopped, and everyone turned to look at the new arrivals. Blackwood's face went pale when he saw how many men Bear had brought. "This is none of your business, Cooper," Blackwood said to Ezra. "It is everyone's business when a man tries to enslave another human being," Ezra replied coldly, "and when he attacks a woman in her own home." "She is not a woman. She is my property," Blackwood insisted. "She is my wife," Bear said, urging his horse forward. "And if you want her, you will have to go through me and every man here." For a moment, Blackwood looked like he might order his men to attack, but he was outnumbered now, and many of his hired guns looked uneasy. Fighting one mountain man was one thing. Fighting an organized group of armed miners was another. "This is not over," Blackwood said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," said a new voice, and everyone turned to see the territorial marshal riding into the clearing, accompanied by 4 deputies. "Cyrus Blackwood, you are under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and operating an illegal labor camp." Blackwood's face went from pale to purple. "You have no proof of anything." "I have the testimony of 20 Chinese workers who were rescued from your camp yesterday," the marshal said, "and I have the testimony of this man here." He gestured to one of his deputies who was supporting a weak, injured Chinese man. "He told us everything. How you bought people like slaves, how you beat them and starved them, how you murdered anyone who tried to escape." Bear felt his chest tighten as he recognized the man. He had been with Ming-Yue when she was first brought to Blackwood's camp. He had survived. "This is ridiculous," Blackwood blustered. "You cannot take the word of a Chinaman over mine." "I can take the word of 20 Chinamen, along with physical evidence and multiple American witnesses," the marshal said. "Now get off that horse before I drag you off." Blackwood's men were already backing away, unwilling to face arrest themselves. Blackwood looked around, saw that he was alone, and reluctantly dismounted. The marshal clapped him in irons. "Take him to Silver Ridge," the marshal ordered his deputies. "Lock him up and wait for me there." He turned to Bear. "You must be the mountain man who started this whole thing. Ezra sent word to me about what was happening. Took me a few weeks to gather evidence, but we got him." "Thank you," Bear said. "But excuse me, I need to check on my wife." He dismounted and ran to the cabin, pounding on the door. "Ming-Yue, it is me. Open up." The door flew open, and Ming-Yue threw herself into his arms. "You come back," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I know you would, but I still so scared." "It is over," Bear said, holding her tight. "Blackwood is arrested. You are free, truly free." Ming-Yue pulled back to look up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Free," she repeated, as if testing the word. "I am free." "You are free," Bear confirmed, "and you are safe, and you are mine if you still want to be." "Always," Ming-Yue said, "until my last breath." The weeks that followed were busy. Bear and Ming-Yue testified at Blackwood's trial, along with dozens of other witnesses. The man was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. His assets were seized and sold, with the proceeds going to compensate his victims. The Chinese workers who had been rescued were given assistance to return to San Francisco or to start new lives in Colorado if they preferred. Many of them came to thank Bear and Ming-Yue personally, calling them heroes. But Bear did not feel like a hero. He had just done what any decent person would do. He had protected someone who needed help. The fact that he had fallen in love with her in the process was just a happy accident. As winter settled over the mountains, Bear and Ming-Yue settled into married life. The cabin that had once felt too large for one person now felt perfectly sized for 2. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and laughing and making plans for the future. "I want to learn everything," Ming-Yue said one night. "I want to trap and hunt and survive in wilderness like you. I never want to be helpless again." "You are not helpless," Bear said. "You survived things that would have killed most people." "But I want to be more than survivor," Ming-Yue said. "I want to be equal partner. I want to stand beside you, not behind you." Bear kissed her forehead. "You already do. But if you want to learn, I will teach you everything I know." And he did. Over the course of that winter, Bear taught Ming-Yue how to set traps, how to track game, how to read the weather and predict storms. She learned how to skin animals and tan their hides, how to make candles and soap, how to preserve meat and forage for edible plants. She was a quick study, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. In turn, Ming-Yue taught Bear about her culture. She taught him more Chinese words, until he could hold simple conversations. She taught him about the history of China, about philosophy and art. She even taught him calligraphy, though his large, clumsy fingers struggled with the delicate brushwork. They laughed together often, at Bear's terrible pronunciation and Ming-Yue's occasional confusion about American customs. They grew together, learning each other's rhythms and habits, becoming not just husband and wife, but true partners. Spring came, and with it, new challenges and new joys. Ming-Yue discovered she was pregnant in April, and Bear was so excited he picked her up and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "I am going to be a father," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "I am going to be a father." "And I am going to be mother," Ming-Yue said, touching her still flat stomach. "What do you think, boy or girl?" "I do not care," Bear said honestly, "as long as they are healthy and have your smile." "And your strength," Ming-Yue added, "and your kindness." The pregnancy was not easy. Ming-Yue was sick for the first few months, and Bear worried constantly, but she was tough, his Ming-Yue, and she pushed through. By the time summer arrived, she was blooming, her belly round and her face glowing. They talked about the future, about how they would raise their child. "I want them to know both cultures," Ming-Yue said, "Chinese and American. I want them to be proud of both." "They will be," Bear assured her. "We will make sure of it." In late October, almost exactly 1 year after they had been married, Ming-Yue went into labor. Ezra's wife, Martha, had come to stay with them for the last few weeks, and she took charge with calm efficiency. Bear, for all his size and strength, felt utterly helpless as he listened to Ming-Yue's cries of pain from the bedroom. "First babies take time," Martha assured him. "She is doing fine. Just be patient." But patience had never been Bear's strong suit, especially when it came to Ming-Yue's safety. He paced the cabin like a caged animal, jumping at every sound. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound, a thin, wailing cry. His heart nearly stopped. Martha appeared in the doorway, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son," she said, "a big, healthy baby boy, and Ming-Yue is fine, tired but fine." Bear did not remember crossing the room. Suddenly he was just there, in the bedroom, staring down at Ming-Yue. She looked exhausted, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, but she was smiling, and in her arms was a tiny, red-faced baby, wrapped in blankets. "Meet your son," Ming-Yue said softly. Bear knelt beside the bed, hardly daring to breathe. "He is so small," he whispered. "He's 8 pounds, Martha said with a laugh. "That is not small for a baby." "Can I hold him?" Bear asked. Ming-Yue carefully placed the baby in Bear's arms, and Bear felt his entire world shift. This tiny person, part him and part Ming-Yue, was the most precious thing he had ever held. The baby's eyes were closed, and he had a shock of dark hair. He was perfect. "What should we name him?" Bear asked, unable to take his eyes off his son. "In my culture, name is very important," Ming-Yue said. "I think we should call him Wei. It means great or powerful. He will need to be both to survive in this world." "Wei," Bear repeated. "Wei Thornton, I like it. But we should give him an American name, too, something he can use if he wants." "William," Ming-Yue suggested. "It is close to Wei. William Wei Thornton." "Perfect," Bear said. "Hello, William. Hello, Wei. I am your father, and I promise I will always protect you and love you." The baby made a small sound, and Bear felt tears prick his eyes. He had never imagined he could feel this much love, this much fear, this much hope all at once. The first few months of parenthood were exhausting. Wei was a healthy baby but demanding, waking every few hours to eat. Bear and Ming-Yue took turns walking him, rocking him, singing to him. They were both perpetually tired, but they were also happier than they had ever been. Bear built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Ming-Yue sewed blankets and tiny clothes, using skills she had learned as a princess but never thought she would need. They were a family, complete and whole. As Wei grew, he showed signs of inheriting the best of both his parents. He had Bear's size and strength, growing faster than other babies his age. But he also had Ming-Yue's delicate features and quick intelligence. He was curious about everything, reaching for whatever caught his eye. "He's going to be a handful," Martha predicted on one of her visits. "Smart and strong. That's a dangerous combination." "Good," Bear said, watching his son try to crawl across the cabin floor. "He will need to be both." The years passed peacefully. Blackwood remained in prison, and no one else tried to claim Ming-Yue. The Chinese community in Denver heard about her story and reached out, offering support and friendship. Ming-Yue made trips to Denver occasionally, taking Wei with her so he could learn about his Chinese heritage. She connected with other Chinese families, shared stories and recipes, and found a community she had thought lost forever. But she always came back to the mountain, to the cabin, to Bear. "This is my home," she told him once. "Not China, not Denver. Here, with you." When Wei was 2 years old, Ming-Yue became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1881, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Lily, after the flowers that grew wild around the cabin. Lily was small and delicate, with Ming-Yue's smile and Bear's stubborn streak. Wei adored his little sister, always wanting to hold her and play with her. Bear would watch his children together and feel his heart swell with pride and love. "I never thought I would have this," he told Ming-Yue one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Wei and Lily play in the yard. Wei was 5 now, and Lily was 3. A family. A real family. "Neither did I," Ming-Yue said, leaning against his shoulder. "When I was in that mining camp when Blackwood was beating me, I think I am going to die there, alone and forgotten. But then you find me. You save me." "We saved each other," Bear corrected. "I was so lonely before you came. I did not even realize how lonely until you were there, and suddenly the cabin felt like a home instead of just a place to sleep." Ming-Yue took his hand and brought it to her lips. "We are blessed, so very blessed." As the children grew, Bear and Ming-Yue taught them everything they could. Wei learned to trap and hunt with his father, becoming skilled with both rifle and bow. Lily learned to forage and cook with her mother, but she also insisted on learning to shoot, declaring that girls could do anything boys could do. Ming-Yue taught both children to read and write in both English and Chinese, determined that they would know both their heritages. The family made occasional trips to Silver Ridge, where they were well known and respected. Bear had become something of a local legend, the mountain man who had stood up to Cyrus Blackwood and won. People treated him with respect, and they treated Ming-Yue the same way, as a strong woman who had survived incredible hardship. Ezra and Martha became like family, their own children growing up alongside Wei and Lily. The two families would gather for holidays and celebrations, sharing food and stories and laughter. In 1886, when Wei was 8 and Lily was 6, Ming-Yue gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Thomas and James. The cabin, which had once been spacious for 2, became crowded and chaotic with 4 children. But it was a happy chaos, full of laughter and noise and life. Bear added rooms to the cabin, expanding it to accommodate their growing family. He built beds and chairs and tables, using his skills to craft furniture that would last for generations. Ming-Yue planted a garden, growing vegetables and herbs, both American and Chinese varieties. They raised chickens and goats, becoming more self-sufficient with each passing year. The children thrived in the mountain air. Wei grew tall and strong like his father, with his mother's quick mind and gentle heart. Lily was small but fierce, afraid of nothing and quick to defend anyone she thought was being treated unfairly. The twins were quieter, more contemplative, but no less loved. "Our family is complete," Ming-Yue said one night, watching their 4 children sleep. 4 beautiful children. What more could we ask for? Nothing, Bear said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. We have everything I ever wanted, and more than I ever dreamed possible. But life on the mountain was not always easy. There were harsh winters when food ran low and illness threatened. There were accidents and scares. When Wei was 10, he fell from a tree and broke his arm. When Lily was 8, she got lost in the forest, and Bear spent a terrifying 3 hours searching for her before finding her safe and sound, having followed a deer trail too far. Through it all, Bear and Ming-Yue stood together, supporting each other, loving each other. Their love had not dimmed with time. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by the years and the challenges they had faced together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Bear took Ming-Yue to the creek where he had first found her. The children stayed with Ezra and Martha for the night, giving Bear and Ming-Yue rare time alone. I have been thinking about that day, Bear said as they stood by the water. The day I found you here, covered in mud, digging like your life depended on it. It did depend on it, Ming-Yue said. I was trying to find gold to buy my freedom, but instead, I find something much more valuable. What is that? Bear asked, though he thought he knew the answer. You, Ming-Yue said simply. I find you, and you give me everything. Freedom, love, family, home. You give me life worth living. Bear pulled her into his arms, holding her close. And you gave me the same. I was just existing before you, surviving. But you taught me how to truly live, how to love, how to be part of something bigger than myself. They kissed there by the creek, the same creek where their story had begun a decade ago. And as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Bear marveled at the strange, wonderful path his life had taken. He had been a lonely mountain man, content with his solitude. And then a princess had crashed into his life, and everything had changed. She was not a princess anymore, just as he was not just a mountain man. They were partners, lovers, parents. They were a family. The years continued to pass. Wei grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, but with his mother's wisdom and compassion. He talked about becoming a doctor, wanting to help people. Bear and Ming-Yue supported his dreams, though it meant he would have to leave the mountain to pursue his education. Lily announced at age 15 that she wanted to be a lawyer, fighting for people who could not fight for themselves. Ming-Yue, who had once been powerless and voiceless, could not have been prouder. The twins showed interest in running a trading post, bridging the gap between the mountain folk and the growing towns below. As their children grew and prepared to leave, Bear and Ming-Yue faced the prospect of an empty nest. But they faced it together, as they faced everything. We will have each other, Ming-Yue said, just like at the beginning, you and me against the world. I like those odds, Bear said with a smile. On a warm spring day in 1895, Bear and Ming-Yue stood on their porch and watched as Wei, now 19, prepared to leave for medical school in Denver. Lily, 17, was going with him to attend a women's college. The twins, only 13, would stay home for a few more years. You take care of your sister, Bear told Wei, shaking his son's hand. The boy, no, the young man, was nearly as tall as Bear now, with the same broad shoulders and strong hands. I will, Pa, Wei promised, and you take care of Ma and the twins. Always, Bear said. Ming-Yue hugged both her oldest children, tears streaming down her face. You make me so proud, she told them. Go and do great things, but remember where you come from. Remember who you are. We will, Lily promised. We will make you proud. As Bear and Ming-Yue watched their children ride away, Ming-Yue leaned against her husband's solid strength. They are going to change the world, she said. They already have, Bear replied, just by existing. A Chinese princess and a mountain man, creating children who belong to both worlds and neither, who know that love is stronger than prejudice, that family is more than blood, that home is wherever the people you love are. Ming-Yue tilted her head to look up at him. After nearly 20 years together, he could still make her heart race. His hair was graying now, and there were lines around his eyes, but to her, he was as handsome as the day he had found her in that creek bed. I love you, she said, more than I can ever express in any language. I love you too, Bear said, my princess, my wife, my everything. They stood together on the porch of the cabin Bear had built with his own hands, the cabin where they had created a life and a family. The mountains rose around them, eternal and unchanging. But they had changed these mountains, had left their mark on this wild land, and the mountains had changed them, had shaped them into the people they were meant to be. As the sun set over the Rockies, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Bear thought back to that September morning so long ago when he had heard a scream and gone to investigate. He thought about the terrified woman covered in mud, the princess disguised as a pauper, digging in the dirt for gold that would buy her freedom. He had given her that freedom, but she had given him so much more. She had given him love, family, purpose. She had taken his lonely existence and transformed it into a life worth living. "What are you thinking about?" Ming-Yue asked, sensing his thoughtful mood. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," Bear said. "I'm thinking about how one decision to investigate a sound, to help a stranger, changed everything. I'm thinking about destiny and fate, and how sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them." "Like finding Chinese princess digging in mud?" Ming-Yue teased. "Exactly like that," Bear agreed with a laugh. "Though I think the camp was pretty shocked when I brought you back and started treating you like royalty." "You treat me like person," Ming-Yue corrected, "like equal. That was shock to me too. I am so used to being either worshipped as princess or used as slave. You see me as just Ming-Yue, woman, human being. That was your real gift to me." "And you saw me as more than just a rough mountain man," Bear said. "You saw the person underneath. You did not try to change me or civilize me. You just loved me as I was." "Because who you are is wonderful," Ming-Yue said firmly. "Strong and kind and true. What is there to change?" They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, and then they went inside to their home, their sanctuary, the place where their love had grown and flourished. The twins were already asleep, tired from the day's excitement. Bear and Ming-Yue checked on them, tucking blankets around their growing bodies, marveling as they always did at the miracle of their children. Later, lying in bed with Ming-Yue curled against his side, her head on his chest, Bear felt a profound sense of peace. His life had not turned out the way he had expected. He had thought he would live alone on this mountain, aging slowly, eventually dying with no one to mourn him. Instead, he had found love. He had found family. He had found purpose. And it had all started with a Chinese princess digging in the mud, desperate and afraid, looking for a way to buy her freedom. He had given her that freedom, but in doing so, he had freed himself as well. Freed himself from loneliness, from isolation, from the prison of his own making. "Thank you," he whispered into Ming-Yue's hair. "For what?" she murmured, half asleep. "For falling into that creek bed," Bear said. "For being brave enough to run. For trusting me when you had no reason to trust anyone. For loving me. For giving me this life." Ming-Yue tilted her head up and kissed his jaw. "Thank you for finding me. For saving me. For showing me what real love looks like. For giving me family and home and everything I never knew I needed." "We are a good team," Bear said. "The best team," Ming-Yue agreed, "now and always." "Now and always," Bear echoed. And as they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, the mountains stood watch over their cabin. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the promise of tomorrow. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled and another answered. The world turned, as it always did, bringing new days and new challenges. But whatever came, Bear and Ming-Yue would face it together. They had survived everything the world had thrown at them. Slavery and violence, prejudice and poverty, danger and loss. And through it all, their love had not just endured, it had grown stronger. They had built a life from nothing, carved a home from the wilderness. They had created a family that would carry on their legacy, that would change the world in ways both big and small. Their children would go on to do great things, would help build a better future where people like Ming-Yue would not be bought and sold, where love could cross all boundaries. But that was for tomorrow. Tonight, there was just this. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love when fear would have been easier, who had built something beautiful and lasting. A mountain man and a Chinese princess, a hunter and a survivor, a husband and a wife. Partners in all things, united by love and strengthened by the trials they had overcome together. Their story had begun with a scream in the wilderness and a moment of compassion. It had continued through danger and triumph, through sorrow and joy, and it would end, someday far in the future, with two people still deeply in love, still grateful for the day their paths had crossed. But that ending was decades away, for now they had their cabin on the mountain, their children growing strong and smart and kind, their love that only deepened with each passing year. They had everything that mattered, everything that was real and true. And it had all started on that September morning in 1878 when Jacob Bear Thornton had heard a scream and gone to investigate, and found a muddy, terrified woman who would become his entire world. Some people might call it fate. Others might call it chance. Bear called it a miracle. Ming-Yue called it destiny. But whatever it was, they both knew they were grateful for it, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy. Their love story was not the stuff of fairy tales, with princes and castles and easy, happily ever afters. It was better than that. It was real. It was earned. It was chosen every single day in 1,000 small ways. And that, Bear thought as sleep finally claimed him, was worth more than all the gold in all the mountains in the world. He had found something precious in that creek bed, something infinitely more valuable than any nugget or vein. He had found the other half of his soul, the missing piece that made him whole. And Ming-Yue, warm and safe in her husband's arms, thought much the same thing. She had been a princess once, with servants and luxury and every material comfort, but she had never been as happy, as loved, as safe as she was right now, in a simple cabin on a mountain, with a man whose strength was matched only by his gentle heart. They had found each other in the wilderness, two lost souls searching for something they could not name, and together they had found everything: home and family, purpose and peace. They had found love in its truest, deepest, most enduring form. The mountains kept their secrets, held their stories, and the story of Bear and Ming-Yue would become legend in those parts. People would talk for generations about the mountain man who had defied Cyrus Blackwood, about the Chinese princess who had survived slavery and found freedom. They would tell their children and grandchildren about love that overcame all obstacles, about courage and compassion and the power of two people standing together. But for Bear and Ming-Yue, it was not a legend. It was just their life, their beautiful, hard-won, deeply cherished life. And as the years passed and their children grew and their own hair turned white, they never forgot how it had started. They never forgot that moment when their eyes had met across a creek bed, when two people from completely different worlds had found common ground. Every year, on the anniversary of the day they met, Bear would take Ming-Yue back to that creek. And every year, Ming-Yue would laugh and say, "I am not getting in the mud this time." And Bear would pull her close and say, "I would not care if you did. I would still love you just as much." Because that was the truth of it. He had fallen in love with a woman covered in mud, desperate and afraid. And he loved her still, decades later, with every fiber of his being. The circumstances had changed, but the love had not. If anything, it had only grown stronger. And Ming-Yue felt the same way. She had fallen in love with a rough mountain man who had shown her unexpected kindness. And she loved him still, with a love that had weathered every storm, that had grown roots deep enough to withstand anything. Their children would grow up and have children of their own. Wei became a respected doctor, serving both white and Chinese communities with equal care. Lily became a fierce advocate for workers' rights, using her law degree to fight against the kind of exploitation her mother had suffered. The twins ran a successful trading business that brought prosperity to the entire region. And through it all, Bear and Ming-Yue remained the constant, the foundation. They were the example their children pointed to when asked about true love, about partnership, about overcoming adversity. They were proof that love could cross any boundary, survive any challenge, triumph over any obstacle. They grew old together on their mountain, watching the world change around them. The Wild West became less wild. Towns grew into cities. The railroad expanded. Technology advanced. But their love remained timeless, unchanging in the best way. And when Bear finally passed away in his sleep at the age of 85, with Ming-Yue's hand in his and his children and grandchildren gathered around, his last words were, "Thank you for loving me." And Ming-Yue, through her tears, whispered back, "Thank you for finding me." She followed him 2 years later, her heart simply giving out one quiet morning. Their children found her in the garden she had tended for decades, a peaceful smile on her face. And they knew with absolute certainty that she had gone to be with Bear, that they were together again. The cabin on the mountain became a family treasure, passed down through generations. Wei's children would bring their children there, telling them the story of their great-grandparents, about the mountain man and the Chinese princess, about courage and love and the power of compassion. And sometimes, on quiet mornings, people swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand through the trees. A tall, broad-shouldered man with long hair and a gentle smile, and a small, delicate woman who walked beside him as an equal, her hand in his, her smile radiant. Maybe it was just shadows and morning mist. Maybe it was just wishful thinking. Or maybe, just maybe, some loves are strong enough to transcend even death, to echo through eternity, to remain bound together no matter what. Bear and Ming-Yue had found each other against all odds. They had built a life from nothing. They had created a legacy that would last for generations. And they had loved each other with a love that was pure and true and eternal. Their story started with a scream in the wilderness and a moment of compassion. It continued through danger and triumph, through building a family and a life together. And it ended with two people who had loved each other completely, who had chosen each other every day, who had been partners in every sense of the word. Some love stories are written in the stars. Others are forged in fire. But the best ones, the truest ones, the ones that last, are built one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of compassion and understanding at a time. Bear and Ming-Yue's story was one of those. A story of two people who should never have met, who came from completely different worlds, who had every reason not to work. But they did work. They worked because they chose to, because they saw beyond surface differences to the person underneath, because they loved with their whole hearts. And in the end, is that not what we all hope for? To find someone who sees us truly, who loves us completely, who stands with us through everything? To find a love that endures, that grows, that becomes more precious with every passing year? Bear and Ming-Yue found that. Against all odds, despite every obstacle, they found it. And they held on to it with both hands, cherishing it, nurturing it, making it the foundation of everything they built. Their legacy was not just their children or their grandchildren or the changes they helped bring about in the world. Their legacy was love itself. The kind of love that transforms, that heals, that makes everything better. The kind of love that gives hope to others, that shows what is possible when two people truly commit to each other. And so their story ends as all the best stories do. Not with death or separation, but with love. Love that transcended time and place and circumstance. Love that started with a mountain man discovering a Chinese princess digging in the mud and treating her with a kindness that shocked everyone around them. Love that grew into something profound and beautiful and lasting. And somewhere, in that cabin on the mountain, in the whisper of wind through the pines, in the babble of the creek where it all began, their love lives on. A testament to the power of compassion, the strength of commitment, and the enduring nature of true love. Bear and Ming-Yue, a mountain man and a Chinese princess, two people who found each other, chose each other, and loved each other for all their days, and lived happily, truly, deeply happily ever after.